Welcome back to episode 4 of the Nillion podcast, where we're highlighting founding entrepreneurs building on the Nillion network and showcasing what they're bringing to market. So you have your usual co-hosts, Lucas and myself, Juan, and today we're really excited to have on Michael from Fulcra Dynamics. Michael, great to have you here today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I think a good place to start is, Fulcra is so many things at once, and I think this could appeal to
Right.
various different audiences, from health geeks to just day-to-day optimizers. So, how would you describe Fulcra in your words and what you're building?
Fulcra at its heart is a personal data platform. It's a tool to help you collect all of the data that your life is already producing, bring it together, so break it out of its silos and put it under your control for whatever you want to do.
Tell us a little bit more what you mean by that, by those data, different data sources sitting in silos right now. What sort of
Right.
data are we talking about? Why is this interesting? Why is that important?
Right. I love seeing what our customers are doing with Fulcra. There are a lot of biohackers and I would say like fitness nerds who are using the Fulcra platform to bust their wearables out of their individual silos so they can see all their data together. Like if you're like me and you're rocking an Apple Watch, but also an Aura Ring, I have a connected smart bed, I have a connected smart scale. I actually want to see all of my bio data together. And I have a gorgeous monitor. I want to see all my bio data together on the big screen, not by checking a bunch of apps on my iPhone. So I have all of that data pulled together so I can visualize it together and I can see how different aspects of my life relate to each other. For instance, I love my smart bed. I have an 8 sleep bed, keeps me cool at night. Um, and it tells me about how I slept. It has no concept of what I did during the day that's actually contributing to whether I had a good night's sleep or not. But my Fulcra data store does, because I'm shoving all of my location into there, my personal calendar, my work calendar, and you can apply a bunch of inference across this kind of data collection. For instance, I'm not a big I'm not a diligent time tracker. I'm often getting sucked into work at weird hours, and I'm not necessarily like logging that. But you can tell when I'm working by looking at the like data exhaust of working, which is emails sent, emails marked red, things that appear on my calendar. Sometimes it's not just about what appears on your calendar, but also how your calendar changes. So since my calendars are headed to my Fulcra data store is this like independent series of snapshots. I can do crazy metadata analysis on how often meetings are rescheduled, when they appear, not just what the meeting is going to be in the future, but actually like when did I catch that thing on my calendar? When did I approve it? Which is another indicator that I was paying attention to work. When you collect all of that, then you can see, for instance, how your sign-off time from work actually affects your sleep. This has adjusted some of my patterns of life. A really big one is seeing how glucose spikes affect lifestyle, affect things like your sleep. So we as founders have all experimented with CGMs, not because we have diabetes or even are pre-diabetic, but rather because it's a really convenient way to passively monitor your eating without having to remember to take snapshots of your food or something. And it's actually incredible to see how the final glucose spike of the day really can affect sleep quality. And I think sometimes you see health influencers talking about stopping eating earlier in the day in order to sleep better. But the big question whenever you're receiving advice from anyone at all, an influencer or a scientific paper, is does the thing that worked for this person actually work for me? And the answer often is no. So another kind of wonderful use case of Fulcra, just still in that health domain, is trying out some lifestyle improvement and seeing, does it work on you? So we saw, for instance, some hard data among some of us that that eating carbs to earlier in the day, and if you feel hungry later in the day, just go for high fat, high protein, extended the length of deep sleep. So I guess one way to wrap all of this in a bow is to say that the like answers to how you should live, the answers to what would be a meaningful life improvement for you, are out there. They might already be in the data that is produced by some system you've already incorporated in your life. You just don't know. And when you pull all this stuff together, then these little insights pop out. So we're like making every one of these little siloed devices into something that feels more like an integrated swarm of intelligence that's working for you.
It's wonderful, and also perfectly fits into very much Nillion thesis, which is
Right.
how can we bring data from different places that are currently siloed into one place, right? And how can we actually learn more about the data, not just about one user, but actually ideally collaboratively across users, which is
Yeah.
an even richer data set, right? Because all of a sudden we can compare ourselves with others, and we will get to that later in this conversation, which I'm very much looking forward to. But a lot of this data is sensitive, a lot of this data is private, and sits in silos, and we need a new way to bring all of this data together to aggregate analytics and to actually learn more about how we live our lives and so many other things. So it's fascinating to have you here today, and we'll love to dive deeper into some of the examples you brought up there in a second. But actually, want to zoom out a little bit before we do that,
Right.
and learn a little bit more about how you actually started Fulcra in the first place. I know you have been a founder for quite a long time. This is not
Right.
your first venture.
Yeah.
Maybe if you want to walk us through everything you've done before and what your light bulb moment was when it comes to Fulcra.
I'd be delighted. My entrepreneurial journey begins when I was a teenager. I never went to college. I started an ISP in the late '90s, like a regional ISP. Helped people get online for the first time. And since then, I've been a creator and technical co-founder for a variety of interesting and fun things. I'm probably best known for starting a cybersecurity company, originally called White Ops, now called Human, that is the winningest botnet defender on the internet. We protect a massive amount of online traffic, helping people differentiate real live human interactions on the web from stuff being faked by bots. And it turns out that fighting botnets is like an important front in the defense, the collective defense against cybercrime, because many forms of cybercrime are like annoyances on a small scale, but become massive societal problems when a botnet can be used as force multiplication. So my co-founders and I, Ash Kalb and Dan Kaminsky and Tamer Hassan, had this insight that if we built a company to take on that force multiplication, the force multiplication that comes from automation or scaled kind of man in the browser type attacks, then we could have a far-reaching effect on the entire internet, taking on the profit centers of cybercrime. So I loved starting that company. It grew fantastically well, and it felt good because it was such a meaningful mission. We're literally making cybercrime less profitable, and we could measure our impact by the profits to our cybercriminal adversaries and the reductions that we made possible by taking down botnets. I started that company in New York. Had as I said, the good fortune to grow very, very well. Now I'm speaking to you from deeper in New England. I've moved to the coast of New Hampshire, and my co-founder Tamer succeeded me as CEO, and I started focusing on my crazy personal mad science experiments. I because of the great growth in human, I got to see how a company improves when it grows big enough to have a dedicated biz ops team, like dedicated analysts measuring what matters at the company, and then making those measurements accessible to every decision maker at the company. So we could make fewer decisions just by like gut feel, and more in a rigorously analytical way. And I loved the effect this had on operational efficiency, and so I started thinking, man, I want biz ops for life. Like what? There are so many decisions in life, some of which are they're like quotidian, but actually deeply meaningful. Like for instance, which healthcare plan should you choose? Every year, most of us who are full-time employees, have to like revisit our benefits package and go, should I keep this health plan? Should I switch to the PPO or the EPO? Well, like the answer to which healthcare plan you should choose is derivable. Like you should be able to look at all of your healthcare spending, everything that insurance covered, everything that it didn't. Start extrapolating about the patterns in your life, do a little forward projection, and like pick the one that's right for you. Almost nobody does this because it's too damn hard. In order to actually like drive that decision, you'd have to gather data from a variety of different sources. Like it all theoretically exists in digital format, but it's really hard to gather. So almost none of us like actually make this a rigorous analytical exercise. We just sort of go with our gut. So I set out to solve this problem. And nerdily, this means solving the observability problems in life, like gathering all of that data together. Most of us now are living these rather complicated lives from an IT perspective because we have far more than one computer, right? Personal computing started with one computer. Now I've got all of these different connected devices. They come from different vendors. They were not designed to work together. So we're living lives kind of like the enterprise. Like in the enterprise, it's normal that you adopt different kinds of hardware and software from multiple vendors, and you need it all to work together. So in the enterprise, you have your choice of enterprise operating systems to plug everything into. This is like Palantir, MuleSoft, ERP systems like what's made by SAP. There's a wealth of choices. Personal software has nothing like this. There's no Palantir for people. So I started kind of cobbling one together for myself, and that turned out to be extremely useful. And so after kind of prototyping this on my own life, we decided to make this into a real product. So the roots of Fulcra go back to this idea that there isn't a single like data lake for people. And we started that before ChatGPT came out, which was just 2 years ago. Now with AI capturing the popular attention, there's a new reason to have a personal data lake, which is to have a single integration point that you could plug something like ChatGPT or Claude or a locally running LLM into, so that you can use external intelligence on your own personal data.
In the same way that in the 90s, as you mentioned, you said you were setting up an ISP. I'm sure you got some pushback then, like who's gonna be using the internet in rural areas? And then we saw it with AI, like who's really gonna be using an LLM on a daily basis? I'm sure now you're still seeing some pushback of, well, are regular people really gonna be measuring glucose spikes before bed? So my question is, where do you think we are in terms of the adoption curve, right, for health and wellness science and all these tools that are offered?
Oh man, I'm going to share a real world example that is both interesting and trivial, because I think that that gets to the heart of your question. I'm really, really excited about AI augmentation being accessible to a massive number of people, empowering them to do things that only a programmer could do before. Only a programmer with a bunch of spare time. For instance, my co-founder Ash, he likes working at a like treadmill desk. So he's got a killer standing desk set up at home, and he's got a treadmill underneath his desk. So like walking on his treadmill is a major form of exercise for him. The last time his shoes wore out and he bought a new pair of shoes, he realized that his worn out pair he had worn he had bought while Fulcra was up and running. So he had in his Fulcra data store various records on like all the times that he ever wore that shoe, because it's like his track shoe. So you could derive this. He's also like me. He's not like necessarily diligently self-documenting, but because he's got his systems tied to his Fulcra data store, it's capturing all of his workouts. His step count from his Apple Watch. He could figure out all the times when he was wearing his shoes, and so he could literally calculate how many miles of walking his shoes lasted, which was like hilarious. He got to like a very specific number. I might blow this, but I feel like it was like something like 377 miles. The way he figured this out was in a Python notebook. He figured this out in Google Colab with some code that pulled all of the necessary data from his Fulcra data store, calculated it, and gave him this final answer. And he's no real programmer. He has a law degree. The way he was able to write that code was in collaboration with ChatGPT. And the reason that I love this is precisely because it's kind of like just a trivia answer, right? Like how long did my shoes last? Right? It's just idle speculation. No one is legitimately like going to go out on Upwork or something and like hire a programmer to like do this calculation, right? But since Ash could do it in collaboration with ChatGPT, it was actually just something that you could spend like just a couple minutes of idle speculation on, and then you'd have the answer, which made it worth it, right? So like think about how much of your life is like that, where you're like idly curious. Oh, I wonder about blah blah blah, but it's just like too much friction to figure out what the answer is. I think that LLMs, especially code writing LLMs, are just astonishingly good at rubbing off all that friction. So you can just have this like different, like more action-oriented approach to life. That's like, let's go. We're going to figure this out, right? And right now, that's only happening among early adopters. But I think that the usability of foundation models to help you like generate random code is just going to get easier and easier and easier, and that makes this. There's just going to be this whole category of activity that's kind of like DIY software, or personal software. It's just a little bit of code that is a one-off. No one would have ever been able to afford making that into an app, so no one's going to write it for you. But once you're empowered to just be able to write these little toy programs, why not? So I think that some of the ways in which people are expecting artificial, let's say, super intelligence to change the world might be really overblown. Whereas just this tiny improvement, just empowering lots and lots and lots of ordinary people to kick out some functional code is probably underestimated in its aggregate positive effect on the world.
I love that example, Michael. The number of use cases that Fulcra can enable is tremendous, right? And there will be lots of use cases that you may not have thought about, right? What are people actually finding out about themselves that they didn't before? And it reminds me a little bit of Nillion, because Nillion obviously is a general purpose private computing platform, a search platform. And in the early days, people were always asking us what are the use cases, and they're still asking us for that. And now we have concrete examples to point to where it's very obvious why data security and data privacy are so critical. But what I love about your example is this is probably one of the use cases that you might not have thought of. Right? Calculating the lifetime of shoes is probably not the most obvious thing that Fulcra enables, but did enable for Ash. And I love to sort of visualize how that could evolve into all sorts of different use cases. You mentioned a few initially in the conversation about glucose monitoring and things like this and how that impacts deep sleep.
Right.
Out of curiosity, what's the number one thing that you've seen so far with Fulcra, like insights, data stats that were extremely surprising in terms of like once you added 2 data points together or more,
Right.
which you would have never ever thought about how they impact each other? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a personal insight. This is kind of a twofer. It wasn't until Fulcra was up and running and absorbing my data from various sources that I discovered, like, to my shock and delight, that my Apple Watch is producing a time series of how loud it is in my environment all the time. Like, I had a hint of this because every once in a while it would like warn me, oh, you're in a very loud environment. But I didn't realize that even when it's like kind of quiet, it's actually like writing a data series. So that just automatically showed up in my Fulcra timeline, and I was like, oh, I didn't know this. And I visually, in something that we call the timeline view, I just put this audio time series next to my sleep data, and I could see how sounds in the night were affecting my sleep, changing what phase of sleep I was in, which I thought was just wild, right? Because it was affecting me subconsciously. Like, by definition, I couldn't know about this because I was asleep, right? These are not noises in the night that are like loud enough to wake me up. But what was happening was you could see clear as a bell that noise in the night would like take me out of core sleep and into REM sleep. So I was like, and then in my dreams, I think I was incorporating those, sounds, right? So like this didn't even require any crazy data science or something. It was just like literally lining up 2 events next to each other, looking at them with my eyes, and my brain was like, oh, what do you know? These things are correlated with each other. That was a just early experience that still strikes me emotionally because I was like, oh, I think we're onto something, right? Like what other things are happening at the same time and are actually have some sort of causal relationship, and we just don't know because we've never looked at them together before. So that one really stands out. I already spoke about causal factors to sleep quality. I'm not only have I shifted my eating, but I've also I've really changed the way I've been thinking about ending the day with a glass of wine, because I can see how even like half a glass actually affects my heart rate low during the night. So basically, I have an elevated resting heart rate after even a relatively small amount of alcohol, and there's also a negative effect on HRV. And I would have never noticed the effect size even with small amounts, like just half a glass, if it wasn't for all of this data streaming into my Fulcra data store. So I would have just been ignorant of it. So that's led to this like different behavior change where like I'm like, I think the answer is even less, which my past self would have really been skeptical of. You know what I mean? I'd be like, that doesn't sound right. What about all the longitudinal studies about the Mediterranean diet being a good thing, right? So this is a little microcosm of that phenomenon I was talking about before, which is instead of processing advice about what supposedly worked for a million study participants, why don't you just find out what it's like for you specifically?
Fascinating. So for all the listeners, no wine before going to bed, right? That's the conclusion out of this. But actually, rather than making that conclusion, let's use Fulcra and find out for yourself, because maybe the wine effect is less for you than it is for you, Michael, right? So
that's exactly right. Yes. Yeah.
You're giving people false hope that it's not going to be bad for their sleep, Lucas. Um, but so one thing that I think people who are listening to this are probably wondering because for those of you who don't know, Nillion provides blind compute, essentially meaning you can produce computation or get outputs on your data without ever revealing that data, while always holding the encryption decryption keys yourself, meaning it's really your keys, your data, right? So on one hand, you might not care if a third party knows how often you wear out your shoes or what color t-shirt you wear out when you go out on the street. But then there are varying levels of data that become more and more sensitive, a lot of it being health data. So how does Nillion plug into this equation, right? Like, where does that come into the picture?
I'm really excited about this partnership because I think we're going to discover new things about the world that have never been known before. Um, and it's a variation on what I've been talking about at the personal level. So all of us have learned these like hidden patterns of our individual lives by looking at our individual Fulcra data. Think about all the things we can learn about the world if it was safe to create a global data pool where we safely aggregate the data that's coming from like lots of people's Apple Watches or lots of people's Whoop bands or anything, right? For instance, the the we're going to learn about geographical variations in how the world sleeps that have never been accessible before. Because sleep studies are usually these very artificial things that require sleep labs. So they're done in little pockets of study participants. How does latitude affect people's sleep? How does how do time zones? Time zones are very coarsely drawn across the world, which means that sundown is different times for different people. Does that have a detectable statistical effect? Are there like social and regional variations in patterns of sleep? Is it possible to correlate sleep disruptions with news events that could be globally important or could just be locally important? The reason why we're not answering questions like this is that the underlying data primitive, about like how I slept last night, exactly when I went to bed, quality of the sleep when I woke up, it's very personal data. So it would feel sort of weird and creepy if like my smart bed maker or Apple, like if any provider of wearables was like, by the way, we're doing data mining on everyone's sleep data because we can read it all, and so we made this wonderful study, right? Instead, what you want is the benefits of the data aggregation without actually violating the privacy of the individual study participants. And this was literally impossible without blind computation. So I've been eagerly awaiting general purpose homomorphic encryption for a long time now, because it unlocks, without exaggeration, so some extraordinary world-changing improvements to how we treat data and what kinds of things become knowable. Let's go back to my watch, right? Like time series of how loud it is. What if we made a data pool that was gathering that decibel information for a statistically significant number of people who attended a particular sports event, or ride a a particular form of like public transit, right? Like how loud is the New York City subway at rush hour versus non-rush hour? Is something that I guess the city of New York could try to figure out by adding some instrumentation, but that answer is knowable right now. If there was just a safe way that we could like recruit a bunch of people, hey, you've been riding the subway all year, upload your time series along with a bunch of other people, and we're going to figure out these answers, right? And very, very similarly, that's a cool goal, but the underlying data is sensitive. So we have to make it safe for people to be able to donate or contribute their data for these for like a worthy social cause without putting themselves at risk. And I think that was never before possible. I'm excited to get started with Nillion so we can figure out these new facts about the social world, about the physical world. And after I bet you just a few examples, similarly, we're going to learn from the community. Like what should we tackle next? Let's assemble new data pools that find the hidden patterns that were always there, but were not able to be found because the data was just trapped in these little individual devices spread out across millions of people.
Absolutely love those examples and use cases, and it's such an amazing example for applying computation, distributed infrastructure, and as you said, the next generation of data security that can unlock so many new use cases, which is very exciting in the space we're in, because I would say, like, particularly in the space we're in, we see a lot of incremental innovation, but I think particularly use cases like this highlight very clearly on a public scale, right, why this is potentially radical innovation. And you mentioned the sleep example, you mentioned the noise exposure. The one thing I'm thinking about is COVID-19, right? Like,
right?
How beautiful would have been during the COVID crisis to figure out how certain vaccines impact people, right? Across all these factors that you mentioned, sleep, calorie burn, all these different things, right? Or now, actually, how do people with long COVID differ from people who don't have long COVID in terms of all these factors that you're highlighting here, right? Of course, you can find maybe like 100 people somewhere on the street, but you can never get that scale, the population scale that you can get in real time, right? Because people are consistently generating new data that can literally guide public policy, right? So we're not talking just about an exciting insight for me, and that in and by itself would make it an extremely powerful company and very interesting use case for me also as an individual. But we're also talking about impact that potentially is a global scale, a population scale, a public sector scale, political scale, right? So that's the one thing that I was thinking of immediately. I remember that the years in 2020, 2021, we all were locked up. At that point, I finalized my last year at university, and I remember that some people had issues, some people didn't have issues. We didn't really understand exactly what's going on. We thought we sort of estimated the numbers of people that had infections, but now you actually can analyze the impact of all these things on a much granular scale, right?
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. There's so many lifestyle factors that are either causal inputs into disease or are consequentially affected by disease that are meaningfully measured by our lifestyle grade wearables, right? Your Fitbits, the Whoop bands, the Garmins, the Apple Watches, that could be used to find these kinds of before and after effects. Today, the state of the art is to augment clinical diagnostics with surveys, like the way that people's lifestyle issues are gathered is they fill out forms about when they ate and when they went to sleep. So the pace of innovation is extremely slow. That data gathering is notoriously unreliable, and it becomes completely impractical to use to do like really large scale studies, right? Where you try to gather data from like 1 million people, and that's the scale of impact that we're talking about right now, right? Like imagine if people would be able to opt into a data pool, trying to capture, kind of widely capture data about their lives that could have been affected, that could show a difference, pre and post COVID, to try to get to the heart of what it means to be a long COVID sufferer. um, the just around the world, right? Like what if we could gather that data from literally millions of people in
Yep.
order to find similarly the hidden explainers, like what are the patterns in this data that haven't been acknowledged yet, research leads that haven't been pulled on because that data was just trapped. And in order to do that kind of scientific exploration, again, you almost have to over collect, right? So some people, I guarantee you, some people who have long COVID were regularly slapping CGMs on, or are more diligent than me at tracking their time or taking photos of what they ate. Like so, the we could potentially gather those nutritional factors, some data from the people that were doing that sort of self tracking, but historically it has not been, I would say, safe from a privacy perspective to participate almost in that like over collection. Like, oh, why don't you sort of share all the data that you have about yourself, and I promise it's only going to be used for this single medical study. Is just not a value prop that you've ever been able to make before. And it's exactly the kind of thing that blind computation via Nillion actually unlocks for the first time in human history. So if we can start doing that for longitudinal data collection, we're going to unlock insights about a chronic disease that have never been seen before.
Awesome. Well, very, very exciting. One of the things you mentioned very early in our conversation today, when we talked about your background and your motivation to start Fulcra. Remember, you said there is no Palantir for people, right? It exists for enterprise, but there is no Palantir for people, and you're trying to create that. And I would say that Fulcra, as it is today, and as it will evolve into, will be the first iteration of that, right? I can take a look at my dashboards. I see how location impacts my sleep and how
Right.
noise impacts my sleep and all of these other, really important factors. And I can sort of passively then consume that knowledge and understand what, impacts each other and potentially then change my life accordingly.
Right.
But I actually think that this is way more than that, right, in the medium and long term, because it's an incredible vault that could give rise to an incredibly powerful personalized agent that can tap into all of my data that otherwise would have been siloed, otherwise would have been locked up, not really
Right.
aggregated, to give me very active personalized advice, right? So rather than me just looking at a dashboard and saying, okay, I think this might impact this, and then me trying to infer conclusions from that, what if you apply AI, as we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, that helped Ash to code, something that was able to evaluate the lifetime value of his shoes,
Right.
to actually something that could actually give me personal advice for how I should live my life, right? Whether
Yeah.
this glass of wine that impacted your deep sleep also impacts my deep sleep, right?
Right.
So I think like the potential here to tap into AI and agents is gigantic, but at the same time, I think the necessity for privacy and blind computation in this aspect is gigantic, right? Because I don't want to have a personalized agent that advises me on how that glass of wine impacts me usually and what I should change, knowing that all of the data is visible to one company or one individual.
Right.
Or
Right.
so maybe we want to dive a little bit more into sort of that visionary aspect, because I know you talked about the agent AI
Mm-hmm.
aspect with me a couple of times in the past. Do you maybe want to sort of give us the end game vision of where Fulcra
Nice.
can go?
All right, great. I'm going to talk about two future focuses, and then try to address the question of where we should begin. So first, this may be particular, but if you're listening, you may be like me. I want my fantasy AI agent is what I think of as the guy in the chair. And by the guy in the chair, I mean, I'm thinking to like every cool spy or heist movie that has like the hacker sitting in the chair who's in radio communication with the heroes who are breaking into the building or doing the thing, right? So let's pick apart that fantasy. Like one of the obvious part of that fantasy is that the guy in the chair is, a super badass hacker who's like super intelligent and is giving you real-time guidance as you go do the thing. But the easy to miss part of this fantasy is that the guy in the chair can see what is happening, right? Has what we call, in the like DevOps community, right? Observability, right? And sometimes, of course, the guy in the chair is an AI, right? Jarvis is an AI for Iron Man, and Iron Man is not like texting Jarvis for advice, like the way I interact with OpenAI right now, with ChatGPT. Iron Man doesn't have to like start the conversation, right? Jarvis has access to all of Iron Man's biometrics, knows where he is, has situational awareness about Iron Man in order to proactively offer help. And that's the AI agent that I want. I want this like sort of life co-pilot that I don't have to explain where I'm standing, or like what's on my work calendar, or the fact that I'm stressed. Like, I'm wearing a magic ring that literally, thanks to HRV, heart rate, and inference, knows when I'm stressed, right? So my magical AI agent should like know when I'm stressed, because that might be a great time to offer some help, right? So that's why my colleagues and I at Fulcra are so obsessed with solving this observability problem, right? We are like not going to write an AI foundation model. We're going to be the greatest company to have ever solved this personal observability problem, because we were early in identifying it as an actual problem. It's like a problem that hides in plain sight, and that's going to drive some extraordinary AI assistance for people just who want to get more done in their lives, or who want to understand themselves better. The tagline of Fulcra is "Live deliberately." We think that the potential of AI models to positively augment your life is vastly more important than just like AI automation or replacement scenarios. Like, humans who are augmented by AI are going to be just vastly more capable. And you've already pulled certain kinds of devices into your daily routine, right? So if your hypothetical AI agent can just know what's up with you because of your connected IoT devices, because of the wearables that you're already using, because of the SaaS software that you're already using, you don't need to buy some cool, you don't need to buy like an AI dongle in order to like plug the AI into your life. Like your assistant should be able to use the devices that you already like, and just change those devices from being smart home devices or quantified self devices into the coherent swarm of like AI augmentation devices that are giving observability to your agent. Going forward, the even farther, how would you train a model on me? A lot of people are thinking about how to make an AI-driven digital twin, and like the obvious thing to do is to train on the things I've written or the things that I have said, right? The words. But that does not capture how I live. That captures none of the procedural knowledge in my brain, all the tacit knowledge about how I do stuff. But you can derive that from the data that my life produces, including the data exhaust, like capturing some of my work habits by looking at calendar creation and modification events, right? There's really kind of subtle threads to pull on. So what I'm hoping is that my Fulcra data store by the end of my life is an extraordinary repository of not just like thoughts I've had and things I said out loud, but is a record of how I lived and who I did it with, and that's going to be a kick-ass corpus to leave behind for my heirs. And if they want to train a model on great grandpa Michael, like I am here for it. I want that future model to be able to, teach my heirs not how I baked cookies, right? And maybe maybe you plug it into the household computer, and I literally walk you through my almond flour chocolate chip cookie recipe, and we're going to get this done. So I think I think I might be a weirdo there, but there are others that might relate to some goals like that. Um, it and that is only possible if your data unambiguously belongs to you and is unambiguously inheritable. After your death, it is too late for someone to write to Amazon and say please can I download this stuff. That is not going to work. So if you want to participate in the kind of vision that I'm outlining, you need to make your data your own, and you need to get started now. When people make a Fulcra data store, they're not sharing their data with us. They are making a private repo for them. Our customers' data belongs to them, very, very unambiguously. And so I'm hoping that we become an important force in society moving forward for data sovereignty on the part of individuals. Then finally, I promised that I would talk about where to get started. One of the reasons why we've talked a lot about a lot of health stuff and health insights is it's just a great place to get started, right? Let's get healthier now. So we extend that date where only your digital twin is left behind as far into the future as possible, right? So getting a handle on your health, unlocking the hidden drivers of your health outcomes, is just like a good first mission for your data that you can get started on right now while we're waiting for AI assistance to get better.
Wow, that's a powerful statement across for so many different reasons. And I mean, I suppose the TLDR is when you pass on, you want to leave your data behind to a third party corporation, or do you want to leave it behind to your grandchildren, right? So that's a good way to put it. So I think we're coming up on the top of the hour here. Is there anything else, Michael or Lucas, that you'd like us to touch on before we wrap up?
This has been a fantastic, wide-ranging conversation. I've just loved it.
Yeah, I think we covered lots of good ground. I mean, I guess as a last point, we'd love to hear next steps on your side, really, from a product standpoint, right? So how can people get engaged? What are the next steps for you guys? Yeah.
Right. So check us out at fulcra.ai. That's Fulcra, like the plural of fulcrum. We're really obsessed with the ways in which your data can give you leverage to become literally more powerful in your life. So fulcra.ai to learn more about our software. And if you want to participate in our pioneering data pools, these efforts to learn more about our physical and our social world, you can check out fulcra.ai/Nillion, where we share the latest on the collaborations that we're doing together.
Looking forward to it, Michael. It's been a real pleasure having you on, and hoping we can do this again soon in the near future.
Fabulous. Me too.
Thanks, Michael.
All right.
Thanks.